Hello everyone, welcome to yet another sessions for the daily news analysis by SRIRAM'S IAS, where we take up the important articles featuring in the Hindu newspaper and simplify them for ourselves from the UPSC exam perspective. With this, let's dive right into the important articles for the day. The important articles which appear in the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 8th June are on your screens. Let's take up the first article for the day. The first article which appears in the newspaper reads, "Of what good is a bad bank?" Now, has anyone heard of this concept called bad bank? So, this article talks about the setup of the bad bank which is being set up by the finance ministry to take care of the NPAs. Now this is a very crucial topic from the perspective of GS3, and we know the importance of banking in the newspaper, where continuously questions are asked in the of the sector of banking. So we'll be dealing with this article in detail, discussing as to from the germination of the problem as to what are NPAs or non-performing assets and how are they troubling the economy, and to solve this problem, what is this concept of bad bank that is being touted and set up to deal with this crisis. Will this concept will be able to deal with this crisis properly? What are some of the arguments that are in favor of the setting up such a bad bank, and what are the arguments which are setting against such a setting up of a bad bank? So with this, let's take up the discussion for the non-performing assets. What are non-performing assets? When we say non-performing assets, what do we mean by non-performing assets? So non-performing assets are nothing but the loans that bank give to any people or body corporate or legal entities, and whenever these loans are not able to be retrieved back by the bank, then that loan becomes a defunct loan and is known as a non-performing asset. Why is it called the asset? Because any loan that the bank is issuing is an asset for the bank, and NPA is that asset which is not producing any income, right? On a bank's balance sheet, loans made to customers are listed as assets, as I said, and the biggest risk to a bank is when our customers who take out loans stop making their payments, causing the value of the loan assets to decline. And the percentage of such bad loans in our economy is quite high. So in effect, what is the NPA then, or what exactly is the date after which a loan, if not repaid, turns into an NPA or a non-performing asset? So if a loan, if is not repaid for more than 90 days after its due date, then that loan is termed as a NPA. And there are certain classifications done for this NPA. What are these classification of the NPA? The first classification we call as substandard assets, wherein these are those assets which have remained NPA for a period of more than 90 days and less than 12 months. So this becomes the first criteria, and our definition of NPA flows from this, wherein a loan is not able to be paid for since 90 days, and that first class of the NPA is known as substandard assets. Then the next classification is known as doubtful assets, where if the loan or asset is in the substandard category for a period for more than 12 months. So this loan, if it is exceeding the time period for 12 months, which means that the loan is continuously being not able to be repaid for longer period of time, so that is considered as a doubtful asset. And what is loss assets? It is the third kind of classification for NPA, where now the loan is being thought of not being able to repay at all, and it has been identified as lost by the auditors of the bank. So this is the classification of NPA. We understood that this is a type of NPA wherein such loans granted by the banks which are not being able to be repaid for more than 90 days turn out to be NPAs. Now, why are NPAs so high in the country? Let me tell you, NPA problem is a very crucial problem in the banking sector, where around 2.2 lakh crore NPA exist in the Indian economy. Such high amount of bad loans or loans which are not able to be repaid. And due to this, what happens is that a lot of reserve money against these loans is with the banks, which is not able to be used in the banking sector to grant more loans. That is why to solve this problem of NPA became utmost importance for the prerogative of the government. Now, along with NPA, there is also a problem which you must be hearing in the news, known as the twin balance sheet problem. What is the twin balance sheet problem? Let's understand that as well. The twin balance sheet problem highlights the balance sheets of the banks as well as companies are in bad shape. Do we know what balance sheet mean? Balance sheet is nothing but the record of transactions of a particular entity. So the twin balance sheet talked over here is one of the bank and the other is of the company. Bank grants the loan and company is taking the loan. So while the balance sheet of the banks is dominated by higher NPAs, right, because they have granted so much loan and they are not able to be repaid back, and on the other hand, the balance sheet of the companies is dominated by higher debt levels, since they have taken the money and are now not able to repay, and their inability to repay back loans. Such a twin balance sheet problem puts the economy into a vicious economic cycle as seen below. What kind of a vicious economic cycle it puts into? So when we have increase of NPA, it will decrease the credit creation. How will it decrease the credit creation? Because already a lot of money has been given as loans and it is not being able to repay it back, which means that the bank do not have much money to further grant loans. So what will it lead to? Credit creation will not be in a very efficient pace. It would decrease credit creation. And what would that lead to? Decline in investment and consumption expenditure. If people are not able to take loans, they would not be invest in other places, and consumption expenditure will also go low, and this would result into an inevitable slowdown of the economy, right? And if there is a slowdown, again the income would decrease and inability of the companies to repay back these loans, because they are also not able to earn and repay back their debt, again increasing the NPA, because now they also want loans in some form or the other to repay back their debts. So this becomes a vicious cycle which is created because of the NPA problem and the twin balance sheet problem resulting from these bad loans. So after seeing the enormity of the problem, this concept of bad bank was talked about earlier in a lot of places, but in the last budget, the finance minister talked about setting a bad bank to solve this crisis. Now we'll get into what this bad bank is. Now what is a bad bank? In this problem of surmounting bad loans, how does a bad bank come into picture? The bad bank is a bank which takes over the NPAs of the other banks and hence leads to improvement in their financial position. So this bad bank is a body which is set up specifically to deal with these bad loans, and it takes these bad loans or buys these bad loans from the banks which are suffering from these bad loans, and they then take over those bad loans and they take up the crucial task of resolving these bad loans. How do they do so? Let's see this by an example. Let's say a bank XYZ has total NPAs of around 1000 crores. Now in accordance with RBI's norms, the bank here would be required to set aside certain percentage of its profits to cover the loss arising from such NPAs, right? This is referred to as provisioning norms. This means that with respect to the loan that much the bank is granting, there is also a certain percentage of its capital which it needs to set aside with respect to the loans. Hence, the increase in the NPAs accompanied by higher provisioning requirements would severely constrain ability of the bank to lend loans and hence affects its overall financial position. That is where bad banks come into picture. How does the bad bank help now? the bad bank can take over NPAs worth rupees 1000 crores, which was the amount of the bad loans from the bank at say 800 crores. Now it is buying the loans at a lesser price. Now this much, one might question that the bad loans were worth 1000 crores. Why is the bad bank wanting to buy only worth 800 crores, and how is the bank ready to do so? But we can answer that by saying that in this scenario, the banks would not even have got 800 crores because the loans were as it is not being able to recovered, right? Now this bad bank undertakes restructuring of such loans. Since it's a specialized body to take care of bad loans, it performs certain functions of restructuring such loans or undertake any other mechanism to recover the NPA amount. And as far as the bank XYZ is concerned, it is at least able to get the rupees 800 crores. With this, it is also freed up of the provisioning amount of the which was set up against the NPA or the loan, and that also gets freed up. This will help the bank to free up its capital and to start lending again, right? In the absence of bad bank, the bank would not even have recovered that much amount. This was what I was talking about, right? That it's a deal worth profit for the bank to do with the bad bank. Now, has there been any examples of bad bank in other countries? So other countries as well, such as US, Sweden, and Malaysia, Finland, Belgium, Indonesia have set up bad banks earlier. And with respect to India, as I said, there was a lot of discussion of bad bank earlier. So in Economic Survey 2016-17 had proposed to set up bad bank, which should be called a Public Asset Rehabilitation Agency or PARA. The PARA should be funded and owned by the government of India. Such a proposal was also put forward by the Indian Banks Association recently in June 22. So this was the news for 2016-17 period where the idea of the bad bank was floated. Now, what is the news right now? We come to the news right now where in the last year's budget, a particular type of a bad bank was set up known as the National Asset Reconstruction Company Limited. Now this is the bad bank in picture today, which the article talks about, that the National Asset Reconstruction Company Limited, or for short NARCL, is going to take up its first tranche of the bad loans from the banks. So what is this National Asset Reconstruction Company? And the important point that we need to see over here is that the National Asset Reconstruction Company has slight difference with the concept of bad bank, which was earlier floated in the Economic Survey or what we were talking about. So how is this different? How is the NARCL different from a bad bank? We'll see. So the bad bank initially proposed by the Economic Survey 16-17 was to be set and owned by the government. This was what the 2016-17 Economic Survey was saying. However, the NARCL has been set up by banks themselves. So this is the first important point that we need to remember with respect to the National Asset Reconstruction Company, that the ownership of this company or what we also call the Asset Reconstruction Company or ARC, the ownership belongs to the banks themselves, where the banks have come together and set up this company, right? So one major difference is in the nature of ownership, and since the nature of role performed by them is same, the terms bad bank and ARC can be used interchangeably. So it's just the ownership which is the difference part, but apart from that, the function is the same as that of a bad bank. This is a point to be remembered, right, with respect to the NARCL, and which is also known as the Asset Reconstruction Company, right? And this Asset Reconstruction Company are registered with the RBI under the provisions of the SARFAESI Act. This act was set up to resolve the stressed assets, and the NARCL has been incorporated under the Companies Act. So that is why NARCL is known as a company and has applied to the Reserve Bank for the license as an asset reconstruction company. Apart from NARCL, the second institution which the article also talks about is the India Debt Resolution Company or IDRCL. Now what is this institution? So there is first bad bank phase known as ARC or Asset Reconstruction Company. This is that company which buys the bad loans from the banks. Then there is an institution known as Asset Management Company. When we say Asset Management Company, now this institution comes after Asset Reconstruction Company, where after having bought the bad loans from the banks, it is then transferred to the Asset Management Company, where this company then tries to do all of its mechanism and restructure the loans. So what is the ARC which is being set up? That is the National Asset Reconstruction Company Limited, or NARCL. And what is the Asset Management Company that is being set up under the budget? That is the India Debt Resolution Company, or IDRCL. Right? I hope this is clear. Alright. This is the difference that we saw. The ARC buys the bad loans from the banks and then transfers them to the AMC, and the AMC would then carry out restructuring to recover the bad loans. The AMC would be manned by the professionals who have necessary expertise in recovering the bad loans. For example, they may have requisite capability to take over the management of the company which has defaulted. So in some of the cases, they can even take over the management of the company to revive the company, make it profitable, and then sell it off to recover the NPAs. In the case of India, India Debt Resolution Company has been set up as the AMC, or the Asset Management Company, which will manage the asset and engage market professionals and turnaround experts. So I hope this setup is clear right now. Up until now, we've traveled to see what exactly are NPAs, how big is the problem, why are we even talking about a bad bank to be set up to resolve. So what is the problem? We saw the problem of NPAs and the twin balance sheet problems as to how then it creates a vicious cycle of increasing NPAs and decreasing credit creation in the economy. And then we went on to discuss what is the idea of a bad bank, what does a bad bank do, and how the NARCL is different in this case, where the ownership is not by the government, the ownership is by the group of banks themselves. And what is the difference between a ARC, that is an asset reconstruction company, and an asset management company, right? Now we come to how bad loans will be resolved through asset reconstruction companies. So what is going to be this process? So as we have seen in brief, the ARC would buy NPAs from the banks. So the first step would be the ARC buying the bad loans. The money is paid to the banks in the form of cash and security receipts. Now security receipts is a form of payment to the banks. 15% of money is paid in the form of cash and 85% in the form of security receipts. The SURFACI Act provides for the issuance of security receipts, right? Then step 2, after having bought the NPAs, there would be decrease in the NPAs on the bank's balance sheets, because now the banks are free of the NPAs, increase into lower provisioning, less money to be set aside, increase in capital, the capital gets unlocked, and increase in credit creation, and one can increase the economic growth. What would be the step 3? The ARC recovers the NPA either through debt restructuring or sale of the mortgaged assets. So ARC has a lot of techniques to restructure the bad loans and convert them into some kind of profit. And step 4, the ARC makes the payment for the security receipts after deducting its management fee. Now, a lot of times what can happen is that while this ARC is resolving the debt, it might not have enough capital, or it might not be able to restructure the debt and would fall short of funds. Here is where the role of government comes in, where the government has decided to give guarantee worth rupees 30,000 crores on the payment of security receipts by the NARCL. So if the NARCL is unable to sell the bad loan or sold it at a loss, then the government guarantee will be invoked, and the difference between what the bank was supposed to get and what the NARCL was able to raise will be paid from the 30,000 crore that has been provided by the government, right? Now the question also is that why the new ARC or NARCL has been set up? Because there are around 10 to 15 ARCs currently working, out of which only 3 to 4 ARCs are well capitalized to take over the NPAs worth rupees 500 crores. However, the total NPAs concentrated in 70 large accounts is as high as 2 to 2.5 lakh crores. Obviously, we could have strengthened the existing ARCs, but the government feels that the new ARC that is being set up is free from all this past burden and would be able to do a fresh job, right? Now we come to, since we have understood now this concept of the NARCL, which is slightly different from a bad bank, but does the same function. Now what can be the arguments in favor for setting up such a bank, or what can be the arguments against such a thing? Now let's try to analyze this. There is a bank which defaulted on its loan. It's not getting its loan repaid back, and now there comes such an entity which says to it that we'll take up your bad loans, we'll see what to do with it, and now whatever money you get through it, you grant the loans. Does it really feel like a very suitable solution and a very efficient solution? Because in this way, the bank, if it has reached this position of rising NPAs or surmounting bad loans, it must happen that it is also at some fault. So by only transferring the bad loans, does it not get free to commit the same mistakes? So that is one major argument which is being given as against setting up such a bad bank. So arguments, first we'll see the arguments in favor, and then we also look at the arguments against such a establishment. So obviously, as we saw, if the bad bank is set up, improvement in the balance sheet of the banks due to decrease in the NPAs and unlocking of the capital that was earlier locked up as provisioning requirements would lead to increase in the credit creation. This was the favorable part that we saw, and enable the bank to focus on their core areas of accepting deposits and lending loans. The function of recovery of bad loans gets transferred to the specialist bad bank, right? So the bank gets free to perform its core function. Most of the NPAs are concentrated in the large borrowers who have taken loans from multiple banks. Presently, such banks come together to form committee of creditors and formulate a resolution plan to recover NPAs. However, such a mechanism is presently facing problem of coordination and delays in the recovery of NPAs, right? So the committee of creditors that has been set up to deal with these NPAs is not able to work properly due to lack of proper coordination. So if a bad bank comes into the picture, it can take care of all these things, and as we saw, the NARCL is set up by a group of banks itself. So these become some of the arguments in favor, where if such an institution comes up who takes the bad loans from these banks, the banks would benefit. But as I said, it is not all a very rosy picture, because if the bad bank stands ready to buy NPAs from the banks, this would discourage the banks from exercising due caution in lending loans. If it is having this picture that if I as a bank default on the loans, there is a bad bank sitting to take my loans and restructure it, I do not have to exercise any caution. So that becomes a big problem for the bank. According to not for the bank but for the economy in general. And according to ex-RBI Governor Raghuram Rajan, the setting up of bad bank would merely lead to transfer of assets from one entity to another. This is also something which we can see, where the one bad asset is getting transferred to another institution, but the asset is of the same quality, it's still a bad loan. And the NPAs of banks has increased on an account of number of reasons. Now here comes the important part where we need to focus, where we need to look at the real problems as to why the NPAs have increased, and this lies in the governance setup of these excuse me, this lies in the governance setup of these banks, where the banks are having other problems as political interference in working of especially the public sector banks, increasing willful defaulters, poor recovery processes. A lot of times the banks do not have efficient recovery processes, and these are the problems due to which the bad loans are increasing, and by just setting up an alternate institution to transfer the bad loans would not really ensure a long-term solution. Therefore, the bad bank does not solve the core underlying reasons which led to increase in NPAs in the first instance, and the bad bank is thus considered to be a superficial solution to the underlying problem of NPAs. And dilemma over pricing of NPA is also there, where if you price the loans higher, then the ARC faces a loss, and if you fix the price of loans lower, it would be the banks who will be facing the losses. And the delays in recovery of NPAs by the ARCs, where ARCs also, if they face delay in recovering the loans, that is also a major point against the setting up of such a bad bank. So this was the discussion wherein we saw what are the arguments that can be in favor for setting up a bad bank and what can be the arguments against such a setting up of a bad bank. Now, what can be the way forward of this? Based on the global experiences in countries such as US, China, Sweden, we need to adopt following strategies to ensure success of NARCL. First of all, the NARCL should be well capitalized. If there is a ARC which is restructuring the assets, it should have a lot of capital, right? So they need to be well capitalized. Then finite tenure. Once it is set up, the bad bank should have finite tenure within which it should be able to resolve the NPAs. It's necessary to give the ARCs a finite timeline. And realistic valuation of NPAs should be done. Usually, banks recover only around 10 to 15% of the fully provisioned loans, and haircuts is as high as 85 to 90%. Hence, banks should transfer NPAs to NARCL at realistic value. And time-bound resolution of NPAs. This is something which we saw, where delays in recovery of NPAs would lead to delay in payment of security receipts to the banks and hence adversely affect their financial position. Then the experts which are consisting of these ARCs and AMCs should be of utmost quality and of the highest level of professional expertise they should contain to solve the NPA mess in a time-bound and efficient manner. And the last point which we saw in the arguments against that, those problems which are the actual problems resulting into the rising amount of NPAs should be should be solved. And for this, the solution mentioned in Economic Survey 2016-17, where we need to focus on the 4 R's of public sector banks: reform, recognition, recapitalization and resolution. This can be the way forward for the solving this NPA crisis and the twin balance sheet problem apart from setting up of such a bad bank. This was our detailed discussion on the setting up of this NARCL and IDRCL, and let's see how they do, how they perform, and within time we'll also assess their performance. With this, let's move on to our next article for the day. The next article which appears in the newspaper reads, "Freeze on new IAS deputation rules." Now, the IAS deputation rules have been quite in news, right? What is this issue all about? What is deputation? What are the new rules that are being contested, and what is freezed on these rules? What is the article saying? So we'll have a discussion on what these rules are, what is the concept of deputation, how are the officers appointed and deputed, what is this problem, and what are the proposed amendments in the deputation rules and the problems associated with it, right? So let's first understand the deputation of All India services. First of all, the All India services, how many All India services are there? There are 3 All India services: the IAS, the IFS, Indian Forest Service, and the Indian Police Service. Now, these 3 All India services have a unique character where the officers are selected by the center, they're appointed by the center, but they are allotted a cadre or a state where they go and work in a state. So this unique setup was, as in the words of Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, was very important to keep the unity of the India intact, where the center appoints the officers and then they are assigned to the states to work in those states. Now, where does the concept of deputation come in then? The deputation is a concept where the officers working in the state have to spend some of the time of their tenure into the central level as well. All the ministries of the center, of the various ministries which are there, they have to spend time in the center as well. And this is the concept of deputation, where they have to spend some time of the tenure in the center as well. Now, this is decided by the two laws, which are, one is the All India Services Act, and under section 3 of this act are set up the IAS service cadre rules. These two pieces of legislation decide the concept of this deputation. Now, how is this deputation done? First is the consultative process, which means that if the center wants certain officers to be deputed to the center, it asks the state, it gives the names, and a consultative process has to be done between the center, the state and the officers themselves. So, as officers are made available for central deputation through a consultative process involving the center, states and the officers concerned, and the center would choose officers only among those on offer from the states. Now, this is what the laws are saying. Now, concurrence of the state government. Now, if the central government wants any officer to be appointed, the existing rule 6(1) of these service cadre rules states that a cadre officer or the IAS officer may be deputed to the central government or to any other state or PSU only with the concurrence of the state government concerned. So, we can see that if the center wants an officer to be transferred or to central position, the concurrence or the acceptance of the state is necessary in that regard. However, it has a proviso which states that in case of any disagreement, the matter shall be decided by the central government. So, this is where if there is a disagreement, the decision of the central government would have to be abided in that manner. Unfortunately, both the center and the states have at times flouted these healthy conventions for political considerations. Now, we can see that there is a recipe of conflict over here where the officers are to be supplied, and if there is a tussle between center and some state, the deputation of these officers can become a matter of political issue. How are these misused? Let's look at some examples. Right? Center and states have at times flouted the above healthy conventions for political considerations. In an example of July 2001, the center unilaterally placed at its disposal the services of 3 IPS officers of Tamil Nadu cadre. Unilaterally means that the consultative processes was not followed. In December 2020, the center did the same in respect of 3 IPS officers of West Bengal cadre. And in May 2021, the center unilaterally issued orders for the central deputation of the Chief Secretary of West Bengal just before his last day in service. This was much in news in the 2021, and in all these cases, the states concerned refused to relieve these officers. This becomes a point of tussle, and some states used to vindictively withhold the names of some of the officers who had opted for central deputation or delay their relief after they were picked by the center. So, if there were some acts done by the center, the states have also in misuse of these laws to their share, where if there are some officers who have been named to be deputed, the center then vindictively is not relieving them to go, or they are not accepting their central deputation offer. So, this is how both center and state are sparring on this particular issue, right? Now, what happens due to this if the states concerned are not sending the requisite amount of officers, much of the vacancies at the union level remain unfulfilled, and this is what is happening, where a lot of joint secretary posts in various central ministries are vacant and they are not able to be filled. With this backdrop, with all of this tussle going on, the central government decided to propose 4 amendments to the IAS service cadre rules. Now, what are these amendments? Let's take a look at that. First amendment is that if the state government delays posting a state cadre officer to center within the specified time, we saw that one of the wrong acts that the state was doing is that delaying the transfer, the officer shall stand relieved from the cadre from the date as may be specified by the central government. This was one of the amendment that was proposed. Presently, officers have to get a no objection clearance certificate from the state government for central deputation, right? This was what we saw. And the second change was, the other change proposed is the center will decide the actual number of officers to be deputed to the central government in consultation with the state, and the latter should make eligible the names of such officers. So, how much should be the number of officers that would be transferred, that the center will decide and the state has to follow. According to the existing norms, states have to depute the All India Services officers, including IPS officers, to the central government, and at any point it cannot be more than 40% of the total cadre strength. So, not more than 40% of the state's officer strength can be sent to the center. But now if the center is deciding the number of officers, it might also happen that the states would face less number of officers. The third amendment is that in case of any disagreement between the center and the state, the matter shall be decided by the central government and the state shall give effect to the decision of the center within a specified time. So this is what has been done, that if there is a dispute between the center and the state, it would be decided by the central government and the state has to follow within the given specified period of time. The fourth change is in that in specific situation, discretionary power where services of a cadre officers are required by the central government in public interest, the state shall give effect to its decision within a certified time. Which means that if in any case, in a public interest, the central government wishes to take services of any officer, it may call the officer to do so and the state has to follow. Now, as we are reading these amendments, we can see that even though the center has to try to solve the problems, it does not do so, or it leaves a lot of scope for arm twisting, and the processes of consultation is not followed over here. So what are the issues with respect to, before we come to issues, let's look at the problem that is being happening because of this. According to the 2021 data, total 6,709 IAS officers in the country, 445 were posted with the union, which means that only 6.6%. And in 2014, of the 4,605 officers, 651 were posted with the union. So we can see the number has gone down from 2014 to 2021. And in fact, in the deputy secretary level, in 2021, the officers which were posted with the center in 2021, a sharp fall from 19% in 2014, even though the total pool of such officers at this rank expanded from 621 to 1130 in 2021, an increase of around 80%. This highlights the problem of the vacancies are increasing at the central level, but there is a shortage of officers to be employed. And as a result, what happens is that appointment of various other officers who are apart from the IAS. This is a trend which we are also increasingly seeing, where the joint secretary posts are being appointed, officers are appointed who are apart from the IAS, and 20 posts of joint secretaries were vacant in till November 2021, and a lot of posts were also established from the private sector, what we also call the concept of lateral entry. So all of this is a result of this conflict between the center and the states. Now we come to the issues of these amendments. Now the issues that this proposed amendments have is that they have grave implications on the independence, security and morale of the IAS officers, right? Because of the conflict going on, the IAS officers get impacted on their independence and morale, and it infringes the rights of states. If such a unilateral decision making process takes place, then infringement on the rights of the states can be also done, right? So, and it is also against the cooperative federalism principle, where in SR Bommai versus Union of India, the Supreme Court held that the states have an independent constitutional existence and they have as important a role to play in the political, social and educational and cultural life of the people as the union. They are neither satellites nor agencies of the center. So this means that the states also have an equally important constitutional position and independent position, therefore they also should be given equal rights. And the consent of officers neglected, so we can see that if the center is unilaterally doing the transfers, the consent of the officer is neglected, which becomes an issue. And scope for political misuse. If the unilateral transfers of officers is done, it becomes a problem for political misuse and may decline the sheen of the All India Service officers. The contemplated changes have grave implications to the independence, security and morale. As we saw, if states begin to doubt the loyalty of IAS officers, they are likely to reduce the number of IAS cadre posts and also the annual intake of IAS officers, which we can see that it has started happening, and they may prefer officers of the state civil services to handle as many posts as possible, right? So this was the discussion with respect to the what were the amendments. Now what is the article saying? That recently what has happened, these amendments which were proposed after filing an RTI application, the ministry has said that they have not yet notified these rules and these rules are yet to come into effect. That is why the headline, freeze on the IAS deputation rules. So we'll have to wait and watch what happens to these amendments, but what becomes important for us from the exam perspective is to understand this tussle between the concept of federalism, what changes occur and what role does the civil services play in such a setup, right? So with this, let's move on to our next article of the day. The next article reads, Tamil Nadu tops the Food Safety Index. Now the Food Safety Index becomes important for us from the point of view of GS2. Let's look at this index, which agency has developed it and who has done well on this index. This index, the State Food Security Index as it's called, is developed by the FSSAI or the Food Safety and Standards Authority of India to measure the performance of states on 5 significant parameters of food safety. We all know the importance of food safety. That is why the FSSAI has developed the index to assess the state's performance on how they are doing on the food safety level. So what are these parameters? The parameters are human resources and institutional data, compliance, food testing, infrastructure and surveillance, training and capacity building, and consumer empowerment. So on these parameters, the states are tested and then ranked. The index is a dynamic quantitative and qualitative benchmarking model that provides an objective framework for evaluating food safety across all states. So this is the relevance of the Food Safety Index. The first index was for the year 2018-19 and this is the 4th edition which has come out. And how has been the performance in this? Tamil Nadu has the top rankings, has come out as the top ranking state, followed by Gujarat and Maharashtra. And among the smaller states, Goa stands first, followed by Manipur and Sikkim. And among the UTs, Jammu and Kashmir, New Delhi and Chandigarh have secured the top 3 ranks. So this is the performance which is based on the front of State Food Security Index, right? So these indexes become important from the exam point of view, right? With this, let's move on to the next article. The next article appears as a data point. We had a discussion data point for e-waste. We had a detailed discussion on e-waste on 4th June. So you can tune into the video of 4th June to look at this discussion. This data point we can use to supplement that discussion, where the data which has come out is that about 1000 kilotons of e-waste was produced in 2019-20 across India according to a Central Pollution Control Board report. So this data point becomes important that way, and for the detailed discussion you can tune into the discussion of 4th June. Right? Yesterday we posted a practice question. We look at the answer today. We had a discussion on Agni 4 missile, which was successfully tested recently on APJ Abdul Kalam Island. So those who read the newspaper article properly could find an answer to this, which is located 10 km off the coast of which state? The question asks this, and the right answer is Odisha. Right? So this is the answer for the practice question which we had yesterday. With this, we come to an end of today's discussion. We'll meet tomorrow again with the important articles of tomorrow's newspaper. Till then, thank you.